We're live. Shannon Watts, Kelsey Barrett. They're all in the national news spotlight. You know, it was like a November day. They were gonna. The courtroom was packed. They were about to read into the record the sentencing for a man who killed his wife and his. Did I mess up? Somebody called me. The sentence was about to be read in the Chris Watts case. The man accused, tried, pled guilty to killing his wife, Shannon, their 2 daughters. People lined up outside the courtrooms. But around the country, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people online were talking about this young lady. Victim of a domestic violence turned killing turned who knows. 3 days after the sentencing of Chris Watts, just days, 3 days later, a woman in Woodland Park was reported missing. That would then turn into an international news story around the world. Shit, if they were on Mars, they'd be talking about this thing. The astronauts found out about Kelsey. You know, reporters begin to chase this story almost immediately. From the second she was publicly announced. I mean, like when they made the public announcement on the 10th, there were news stations from around the world. And this lady was just believed at the time to be missing. White, young, seemingly well-off mothers garnishing national attention, media focus. But did you know that in 2018, according to a Denver study done by the Denver Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, which conducts the city's annual fatality review, that between 2013 and 2016, a total of 100 Colorado women, nearly half of all female homicide victims in the state, were killed by a current or former intimate partner. Why do some lives matter and others seemingly get little or no attention? In 2018, there was 38 other suspected Colorado domestic violence deaths. In 2008, 38. Certain lives matter and certains don't. I didn't say that, by the way. That was Dora Lee Larson, Executive Director of the Denver Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. That may be crass, but there is some truth to it. It's absolutely a class, race, and gender issue. It's crazy. Since I started Dad with a Phone, the Woodland Park Underground, all of this, I never really followed crime cases. I never followed missing persons. I never followed, these kind of news subjects. It's hard to follow these news subjects. You have to be a certain kind of person to follow a missing person that then turns into a murder investigation. Out of 100 people killed between 2013 and 2016 in Colorado, half of those were committed by intimate partners. Now, we've said it before, I'll say it again. You're more likely to be killed by someone you sleep with than anyone else in the world. A lot of times the media screws things up. A woman will go missing, a man will go missing, and they'll begin to speculate on things that have zero to do with the case, but then kind of take over. It was a race killing, it was a cop killing, it was a this killing, it was a that killing. Why do white, well-off American girls garner national news? Why hasn't the black mother who was pregnant, who was a postal worker, why aren't we seeing her name plastered across the country from Chicago? It's weird. Listen, I've been in this knockdown, dropout, screaming matches with my wife. We have argued, we have fought about things, and we have said things to each other. We have been right there at the veil, right? I'm sure of it. Right in the veil. Right at that veil of where it could be torn. That veil that gets torn when lovers, domestic abuse, domestic verbal abuse, the domestic. Ooh, jeez. I just about wore my coffee. That's like a warning. That's like, shut up what you're talking about. It's going to make people crazy. No. You've all been there, right? You've been right at the veil. You could tear that veil and never go back. That's what happens in these domestic cases. It starts with a verbal thing. Then it moves to a physical thing. Then it moves to let's tear the veil. Somebody's dying. It's crazy, though. There's domestic violence happening right now. Right now, a woman's waking up in fear of in her life. A man's waking up because his woman abuses him verbally every day. You're no good for nothing. You're a terrible dad. You're this, you're that. All of which could be completely true, but it's so abusive. A man wakes up, slaps his wife, hits his children, gets drunk at night, does whatever. Happens every day in communities around the world. And then a veil gets torn and someone dies. And at that point is what I'm looking at. We know domestic violence happens. We know domestic abuse happens. We know all these things. And this is a lot of what turns to violence. This is a lot of what turns to murder. Why is it that some people matter? Some people don't. Why is it that the news will pick up this white American, seemingly on top of things, mom, when she gets murdered, kidnapped, goes missing? But across the world, It's happening every minute, every second, every day, and things we never, ever, ever, ever talk about. It's crazy. It sucks. It's not fun. I bet you that there is more domestic violence that happens in white suburbia than there is in the most desperate parts of our country. I bet you it's hidden. It's veiled by a cloak of whiteness, a cloak of prettiness, a cloak of success, a cloak of, it's almost like we've painted the victims bad people. Women don't want to talk about being abused. But then men are so scared because if a woman says abuse, their whole lives can be ruined on the back of a woman's lie. So there's like two stages to this, because I mean, right here in Colorado, one of my good friends, he got charged with rape by his ex. She was a crazy psycho. He had to go to court. His life was almost taken from him. Thank God he's innocent. Thank God he didn't do any of this nonsense that this woman was accusing him of. But he had to go through court. He had to defend his life because of woman's words. So don't think that I'm only painting this abuse as being a male to female thing. There is plenty of women out there that are vicious, crazy abusers. But I'm more interested, and I've been interested in this since if you've been watching the Underground's coverage of the Kelsey Barrett case, you have to understand that I have been more interested in the actual coverage of it than even diving into the case. I sat around with the cops. It's live on my Facebook where I'm like, why here? Why is all this shit? Why is Woodland Park becoming national news? Why are all these damn news stations here? Yes. Do I believe a woman needs the attention if she goes missing? Do I believe that people should be talking about this? Yes, 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 yes. In every case. We should have a news organization. We should have a Facebook page. We should have a YouTube channel that is designated to all people who go missing and all people who are murdered in a domestic case. But I had to ask the question, why Woodland? Why now? Why here? I haven't even been watching y'all's comments. Wait a minute. Let me see what's happening. What are y'all talking about? Are y'all mad at me now? Maybe there should be something to GPS tracking devices, women that your spouse or boyfriend don't know about on a ring or an earring. Truth. Speaking truth there. Uh-oh. I'm getting some amens. Feel like I'm in church now. They go where the money is. You're the best. I was a victim as well as my kids. A cat of physical and verbal abuse. And he gets away. Spilling shit. Steady on. Yeah, Native American killings. Women, and I've heard this before from actual people. Women on Native American reservations go missing all the time. It's law. If it's not media, it's law enforcement screw-ups. Stay warm, safe. She was on. I'm just reading. It's because narcissist lives matter. All right. subject makes me mad too, because I'm trying to think. I don't think I've laid a hand on a woman since I was like 8 years old. I didn't even like physically fight with my sisters. I do remember this one girl on the block. I remember one time she was a big girl and she was like on top of me. Like she had wrestled me down. Like she was probably 4 or 5 years older than me. And I remember hitting her when I was like 8 or 9 years old as a kid, getting beat up by a little girl. I do remember that. My kids suffer from PTSD. Okay. I'll talk about this, but you might get offended. I do not believe in letter diseases, especially around behavior, PTSD. I don't believe in this, and here's why. Because we are all survivors of some sort of traumatic situation in our life. If you're not, maybe you are, we're a sheltered kid. But all of us have some sort of PTSD in our life. If we want to give it a name. And this is my belief on this. And I know this is going to make some people mad. Some people are going to get upset at me, right? I was ADD. I was ADHD. I was all of that shit when it was just bad behavior. I was just a kid that didn't want to sit in a chair, right? Or I didn't want to pay attention for an hour in a class. Bullshit. I had an attention span of a goldfish. I didn't want to sit around and I wanted to run, cause trouble, be in trouble. It was trouble. I saw it because trouble was fun. I didn't know it was trouble I was looking for. I was looking for fun, right? So there's all these things that we've come up with in the Western world. If our children don't know what PTSD, I have to be careful because you have to understand, like, I've traveled the world, and so I don't look at people through the lens of the Western U.S. world. I look at people through the eyes of the world condition. And when I'm not talking about your individual children. I don't know what your children have been through. I don't know what they've suffered. I have no idea. But I've met children who have had their arms cut off as kids. Who lived in societies where they were in fights with their uncles and aunts from another village, and their uncles and aunts would be the one perpetrating crimes against them. These kids are now my age. These kids are just a little bit younger than me, 35. These kids that went through these traumatic civil wars in our lifetime. There are places that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people are slaughtered by Americans, and we send our kids off to school every day as if everything's okay. We call it war. Don't get me wrong. We call it war. But if you want to talk about PTSD in children, just go overseas to a few places, And so when I start thinking about American kids that have PTSD, it's not that they didn't get beat by their dad or they didn't get beat and abused by their mom. If I started telling you the stories of children in my own life, if I started telling you, if my wife got on here and started telling you her story, right? But here's the answer to your PTSDs. Here's your answer to your ADHDs and your ADD kids and whatever else you want to put labels on your children. The answer isn't medication. The answer isn't giving them some sort of drug that numbs their feelings. The answer is teaching your kids to take their thoughts captive. This is an old proverb. You can go religious with it. You can go new age with it. You can go domestic. You can put it in whatever category you want to. It's a 1,000-year-old proverb that says if you'll take control of your own mind, you'll be able to control your outward actions. If you could take control of your own thoughts, if I sit here and I think about all the negative shit people write about me, if I read through all that, people ask me all the time if I read the comments. An ex-NFL football player, very successful, multi-billionaire, lots of money, keynote speaker, speaks around the world to business owners. He advises people around the country. Very successful man. Very, 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 very successful man. I helped him brand 3 of his last books, best-selling books, all these things. He said this one time to me. He said, Michael, my dad taught me never to read my clippings, good or bad. Don't read your clippings. Like, don't read your newspaper articles. Don't watch the news stories that people talk about you. Don't read the negative, and don't read the good. Don't ever read your clippings. And part of not reading your clippings is controlling those thoughts in your head. If I went through here and I read every comment that you guys read or wrote, even in these live videos, if I went through here and I read all these comments about people, and most of you guys are awesome, right? But you guys know there's some negative out there. If I went through and read all of that stuff, shit, my mind would run crazy. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, you know? And so being able to take control of your own thoughts, that's the first cure to any PTSD. That's the first cure to any 3-letter disease that some psychologist or some doctor gives you. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I've been to a lot when I was a kid. I haven't been to that many in the last 10 or 15 years. Shit, I haven't been. The only time I go to a doctor is when I'm dying or like something. Like I blew out my knee, right? I went to a doctor, had to have ACL surgery because I wasn't going to walk around with a bum knee my whole life, right? But those are healers. Those are doctor healers. I like to call those people healers. So there's a difference between what I'm talking about, like a psychologist who wants to tell me something's wrong in my head, compared to the guy who fixes my blown ACL, okay? That's a healer. This other witch doctor guy, I kind of compare him to my sage wife. I have no problem with my wife burning sage in the house and doing a seance over me this morning with some sage stick. I have no problem with that. Doesn't scare me, doesn't trigger anything in my head like, oh, the demons are coming. It is simply the thoughts, right? Her thoughts of this being a positive action are more powerful to me than the thoughts that the sage has some control over the atmosphere and the stuff. So if my wife thinks it's a positive thing, if my wife wants to go around and do a seance around the house or with the sage, I'm being jokeful. She's not actually doing a seance, okay? We're not like witches or warlocks or any of that stuff. But she's using physical smoke as this is clearing the atmosphere, right? And I'm looking at it as, baby, it's your thoughts. It's the fact that you think this. I think your positive thinking has more control over your life than any drug for PTSD, than any situation, any counseling. And let me be honest with you. You guys have heard me say about this before when it's talking about like dreaming for the future. If you've watched The Underground for any certain amount of time, you realize that if you want to talk about your memories, good or bad, you're on your way to the grave. You should let your dreams and the things you want to do be what's on your lips, what's in your mind, and what's in your thoughts. Because if you keep going back to the bad or good, this is the Al Bundy syndrome. I like to call it the Al Bundy syndrome. The guy that you know that's like, man, back in football, I was the star quarterback. I was the homecoming queen. I was this. And that's the guy who works in a shoe factory, comes home, drinks his Budweiser, and turns on Netflix, right? He lives in that Al Bundy syndrome. His memories are much greater than his dreams.